Coming up, continuing our coverage on the major updates to the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, we dive into how museums are teaming up with Native communities to create a blueprint for handling Indigenous artifacts. Plus, an author shares her journey as a young Native woman in a South Dakota boarding school. And we have an in-studio conversation with photographer Shannon Carr-Stevens. That's all next on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amidawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. New rules governing how institutions handle Native American human remains and artifacts is roiling tradition-bound museums. The new guidelines for the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, also known as NAGPRA, place Native voices at the forefront, causing many museums to make dramatic about-faces. But not all institutions were taken off guard. Some are working closely with Indigenous communities, hoping to forge a blueprint for others to follow. Stuart Huntington starts our reporting today.
The new rule is a sea change.
It completely eliminates an institution's unilateral power over these collections and brings in tribes.
Many museums have shuttered displays rather than fall afoul of the new rules. But not everyone was caught flat-footed. 2 years ago, the American Museum of Natural History completed a 5-year overhaul of its 125-year-old Northwest Coast Hall. Steered by Native guest curators, the project perhaps lights up a healing and positive way forward.
That's a hall that was renovated about 2 years ago with real deep consultation and collaboration with representatives of tribal communities, with consulting curators who were brought in, a process that reviewed objects. One of the outcomes of that review is that some objects were repatriated if determined in the consultation that it was most appropriate for them to be repatriated.
It's earning good reviews from important quadrants.
So many Haida from Haida Gwaii, Alaska, Seattle, wherever they are going to New York and making a point of going to the American Museum of Natural History to see the Northwest Coast Hall, to see themselves in it. Our people love to go there, and I think that's the ultimate test of whether the hall is good or not for us. And the hall is good.
Getting there proved bumpy.
You know, it wasn't without conflict, but we have mechanisms to address conflict. The conflict is important. You don't learn, you don't grow unless you can talk through differences, hey?
I think we were able to reach, points of agreement, common perspective, and, that produced an exhibit that we're all very pleased with.
That perhaps lights a healing way forward.
Yeah, I think we can get there. We know we've done it in the past, and we know we can do it again.
The hall was renovated with
deep input into how things are displayed, sensitivities around what could be displayed next to what, or what the framework or what the construct around the display would look like. And to me, that's actually the model of not only what this work should look like or what the product should be in terms of an exhibition hall, but really what the process should be in terms of collaboration between the museum and communities.
The Ohio History Connections Museum in Columbus is also looking forward. As part of a 2020 expansion, it reached out to area tribes.
The decision was made to expand this, and partially because of the need for that expansion, we had this opportunity to bring in more voices.
That inclusivity is now the law of the land, but it's always been just plain good practice, say Indigenous exhibit designers.
When we're getting into a new project, we put together first a committee within those Indigenous communities that we're touching. And we sit down with them, we visit with the artists, we visit with their historians, their elders. We allow them to shape the material that we then interpret and put into the exhibits that we create. In the end, there's something that's far more fascinating that comes out. Now that there's a law in place, I'm hoping that the museums start to figure that out as well. It's not their job to interpret our historical belongings. It's their job to allow us to take those belongings back and then allow us to tell the stories that go along with it.
Stuart Huntington, ICT News.
That was the third segment in our series on the major changes to the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. To see the whole series, read more about these important issues, and watch extended interviews, visit us at ictnews.org. We head now to the land of enchantment, where the University of New Mexico is celebrating a milestone for one of its degree programs. UNM's Bachelor of Arts degree in Native American Studies turns 20 this year. The university will hold a commemorative symposium next week, where alumni will participate in panels discussing how they are applying their NAS degrees in the professional world. The United States only has a few dozen schools in the nation who offer a Native American Studies program like this. Well, a First Nations Olympic athlete is the latest to be inducted into the North American Indigenous Athletics Hall of Fame. Hockey player Kenneth Moore has been honored as one of Canada's first Indigenous Olympic gold medalists. Moore, who is a citizen of the Pickasis First Nation, won the medal during the 1932 Winter Olympics. After his storied career, Moore retired and became a coach in his local community. Every year, the North American Indigenous Athletics Hall of Fame inducts around 100 athletes. According to Moore's granddaughter, his induction signals that more First Nation sports heroes need to be recognized. Back in the U.S., one tribal nation in Minnesota is expanding its golf offerings with the top-of-the-line driving range. The Shakopee Midwankaton Sioux community announced its partnership with Canadian company Launchpad Golf in opening a new facility in Prior Lake. The range will be available for all skill levels and will be built next to the tribe's Mystic Lake Casino Hotel and Golf Course. It will offer food and drinks as well as next-level technology including heated suites, advanced radar technology, virtual golf courses, and other social games. Construction will begin in the spring of this year and is anticipated to open in 2025. One day, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, Indigenous communities will likely look much different than right now. That's why we're launching a short series called Indigenous in 2024. Here we will interview the changemakers of today about their reflections, observations, and hopes. We start our conversation today with photographer Shannon Carr-Stevens. Shannon, I want to start off with talking about an aha moment that you had, and that was a conversation with a coworker. So tell us about that moment.
I was working, I previously worked for our public safety department at Laguna Pueblo, and I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers, and he was talking about, it was either a photography exhibit or a photography gallery that he had recently been to. And he was, so he was telling me about it, and as he was telling me about it, photography is something I've done since I was probably in 4th, 5th grade, and as he was, he was telling me about this exhibit, I started thinking how much I missed doing photography, taking photographs, and so there was something that really just stirred up in me that I had a 35 millimeter camera all the way through high school and just took all my allowance, went to film, negatives, developing, and then after high school went to college, and in college I took a couple of years of photography classes, and then after college got married, family kicked in, and then I just, for probably about 10, maybe 15 years, I just didn't do, here and there, little some photographs, but then after that conversation, I was like, I want to get back to that. I want to get back to that. And so I was moving from film to digital. Everything was digital at that point. got a new digital camera, started looking at lighting, started taking classes, started going to photography conferences, reading books. I mean, I dove in headfirst with this, and I just absolutely, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do is photograph, particularly our Native people. There was, Edward Curtis. You see his photos, and they're very somber. They're very, but that's one side of us. There's a whole other side of us that's laughter. That's about family. That's about finding joy in dark places. That's what I've been moving my photography towards. But that was my aha moment, was that when I heard him talking about, this wonderful gallery, I thought, I want to do that. I want to see my work up there at some point. So that's what that was.
It really sounds like you're an example of somebody who at any age was like, this is my passion, and I'm going to do what it takes to make my dreams come true.
I stubborn, probably mostly stubborn. My dad bought me a 35 millimeter camera when I was in 6th grade, and that was a pretty hefty camera for a kid. But I had more photos than the yearbook committee. I had that camera. I still have that camera today, and so I would do this for free all day long. I love recording people, particularly our Native people. That's just something I just love doing.
This series is called Indigenous in 2024, and I want to ask you, as a photographer and as a storyteller, what you're observing right now that is the single greatest issue impacting Indigenous communities.
Our lifestyle, our health, our own health. We've moved into where it's a lot of processed food. It's just a lot of processed food, and I think that has a tremendous tremendous impact on our own health. And it's the us as Native people getting back to where we were. I mean, we had a lot of farms, we had a lot of fields. There was a lot of, when I was growing up, my dad, my grandfather, they were sheep herders. A lot of, our own, and that's all they ate. That's what they ate. But now it's, and now it's just, it's real heavy on refined foods. And I think that's, and that impacts our health, that impacts our well-being, that impacts the quality of our life.
Yeah.
And I would, and so I would love to see a resurgence in the Native people going back to farming, and even if it's a small, I mean, you don't have to flip overnight, but even a small portion of it, your own garden at home, growing your own foods.
Let me ask you the flip side of that question, and it is, what is the single greatest strength of Indigenous people in this day and age?
I think it's our humor. That, I mean, we've seen all the way, through history. We've seen the traumatic events that have happened to just Indigenous people here, and yet the humor that comes out of, I mean, you can go through really tough situations, really bad situations, and we could still find something to laugh about.
I want to squeeze in another question. We were talking earlier about senior centers and senior centers in your community of Laguna, and one very nearby in Acoma.
Yes.
Tell us what you're doing at those senior centers.
It started weighing on me that a lot of our elders, our Native elders, they don't have really nice portraits of themselves, and they're not there's a lot of studios, like, so I'm in Laguna Pueblo and Albuquerque, there's a lot of photography studios, but Natives are not comfortable going into those studios outside of home. They're comfortable at home. So I thought, well, why not? I have the backdrops and camera and everything. So I started talking with our local senior center and asking her, do you mind if I set up one day? I said, You 50 and over, elder, I said, or if you just feel old, come by. I'll take your picture and no charge. I'll set up everything. I'll take your photo, no charge, and then I can get you digital prints for your families. I started at Laguna, and then I got a hold of the police chief at Acoma, and he's come up. Well, I'll find you a place. And so I'm getting inquiries from other pueblos, Santa Ana, Isleta, Jemez. So I'm really looking to expand this because our elder natives were, especially after COVID, we're just losing them at a high rate, and they should have a really nice portrait of themselves, and I can do that. And so in between my other photography jobs, that's really what I want to do.
Well, speaking of core values, honoring and loving our elders is something that is universal across Indigenous communities. So it's really wonderful that you're doing that work.
Thank you.
Shannon, I thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's nice being here.
March is Women's History Month. To celebrate the women who have made a difference in our lives and the lives of their Native nations, here's an encore presentation of an interview from our archives. Shirley Sneve has this very special conversation with her mother, Virginia Driving-Hawk Sneve, a longtime and award-winning author who shares her personal experience as a young woman attending boarding school in South Dakota.
My mother is an author of several books, fiction and nonfiction. In 1933, Virginia Driving-Hawk was born on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. We sat down this summer to talk about her youth. She attended boarding school during the World War II era.
At St. Mary's, that was during World War II, and we had teachers that were coming from, mainly from New England places. And we had this Japanese teacher that came to be with us. And I didn't think much about her. I mean, she didn't look much differently than the Indian students we had. And she was, and I didn't have her for a class because I think she taught the advanced English classes, and I wasn't ready for that yet. But we had an all-school assembly, and she was explaining about how she came to be at St. Mary's. Her family were in California, and she had gone to school in the East, and I don't remember the college where it was, but she had been sponsored by an Episcopal congregation. And then after her parents were interned, they were taken from their homes and placed in these camps in Nevada, and because they were worried about them being espionage and spies that close to Japan. The congregation in the East did not want her going back to those internment camps. So some pulled some strings some way or other and said that they would be responsible for her. And so they managed to find her this teaching position in the interior of the United States where things would be all safe for her and no spies, that sort of thing. And I remember being so appalled about how can we treat people like that? Just take them away from their homes and then move them to strange places, and she wouldn't be able to go home. And I expressed that to her. I said, oh, that's just terrible that you had to be treated like that. And she looked at me and she said, what do you think reservations are? And of course, I suppose I was about 12 years old, and something like that never even occurred to me, what it was. And it's kind of sparked my curiosity so that I became more aware of what my tribal life had been like, and sparked my curiosity to explore that later as I got older and became a writer.
Tell us about your education and how you grew up and where you went to school.
I liked school very much. It was fun to be around other kids. And then we moved to Oak Creek, South Dakota, and I was in the 3rd grade then and started school there. And I was very fortunate to have a teacher that appreciated that I learned to read very quickly, and I loved to read. and he would give me books from his private library and everything, and I just assumed everybody had books like that. I didn't realize that. And then after the third grade, I stayed in Oak Creek until I was ready for the 6th grade. And then my parents decided I should go to boarding school. And this was usually what happened to children on the reservation. If they wanted more education, they had to go to a boarding school. Well, my parents decided that the Rosebud boarding school, that's where they went. And they had some unfortunate experiences there in not being able to speak the language and other things. And they didn't think I would get the education that I should have. So they sent me to St. Mary's School for Indian Girls, which is at Springfield, South Dakota. And I went there when I was in the 6th grade and stayed until I graduated from high school. And it was a school that later became considered a prep school because we were being prepared for further education, whether it be college or to do something in some sort of an occupation that would require further training.
What was your experience like at boarding school?
I was very homesick. The first, I don't know, seemed like forever. And we slept in dormitories. I was used to having my own bed and sort of privacy. And but the one thing, there was running water and toilets. We didn't have to go outside like we did at home. So that was a plus. But I was very homesick, and I was very lonely and shy. And then the school had a system that they called Big Sisters. So an older student would be assigned to a newer, younger student, and would help them, get through the maze of what was expected of you and the chores you had to do and making your bed and all of these different things, which did help because somebody was keeping an eye on you. So, and then when the classes started, that was fine because I really liked school, enjoyed that.
When we're talking about all the abuse of boarding schools, how about your relatives? Did anybody?
Well, my parents, that generation, are the ones that experienced that kind of trauma or might have. My dad did not speak English when he started school, and so they were forbidden to use the language when in the classroom, and it was very difficult a way to start to learn. And he and a friend of his, Noah Broken Leg, would sneak out and go hide behind the barn so they could talk Lakota to each other and kind of explain to understand what was going on at the school. They never experienced any physical abuse, but they saw friends of theirs that did, who were often supposedly got into trouble for some reason or other, and then they would be physically beaten. But they never were. My dad said we were good boys. My mother, on the other hand, went there, but she did not speak Lakota fluently. It was not her first language because her family had English. And so she had the experience of being teased by the other students as trying to be a white person because she wouldn't speak Lakota.
In your career, you became an educator.
We didn't have much choices. At least I didn't realize that at the time. If you wanted to go on to do something after high school, it was either being a teacher or a nurse. Well, I had no desire to be around sick people or whatever. And so that was all that was left for me to do, was be a teacher. And I got to many years later, after I found out that there were such things as women who were lawyers, I thought, I could have been a lawyer. I like to read, not necessarily a trial lawyer, but something like that. And I always kind of regretted that I never had that opportunity to look at that. And not many of us did at that age, at least Indian girls.
With my mother, Virginia Driving-Hawk Sneve, in the Black Hills, Shirley Sneve, ICT News.
Woollywoon, thank you. Woolly is good. So Woollywoon is thank you in a good way.
That is a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.